The people who work on Pawn Stars are not easy to surprise. They deal with all kinds of strange and rare items every single day. They've seen it all, from ancient coins to old weapons, rare jewelry, and even things that most people would never guess have value. So when someone says the Pawn Stars were frozen in shock, it means something truly unusual happened. This moment wasn't just a normal day at the shop, it was something they never expected, something that caught them completely off guard. It all started like any other morning. The crew was getting ready to open the shop, Chumley was joking around, Rick was already looking at the books, and the usual flow of customers was starting to form. But then out of nowhere the FBI showed up. That alone was enough to cause a stir. People stopped talking. The cameras kept rolling, but everyone could tell this wasn't part of a regular episode. The presence of the FBI changed everything, and not just one or two agents. There were several, all in uniform, all with serious faces. The crew didn't know what to say. Even Rick, who always has something clever to say, was quiet. You could almost feel the tension in the air. It was the kind of silence that only comes before something big happens. Nobody knew why the FBI was there. They hadn't done anything illegal, at least as far as they knew. So why were federal agents interested in an old pawn shop in Las Vegas? Then the lead agent walked in and went straight to the back. He had a file in his hand and a look that said he meant business. He didn't explain much. He simply said they had reason to believe that something hidden, something very old and very important, was under the floor of the shop. At first everyone thought it was a joke, maybe a prank, maybe part of some new episode idea. But the look on the agent's face told them otherwise. That's when things got serious. The crew was asked to step aside while a small team of FBI specialists began pulling up the floor. It wasn't just a few boards, it was a section of the shop that had been there for decades, untouched and forgotten. No one had ever thought to check under it. Why would they? It was just an old floor. But when the floor was pulled up, everything changed. The crew watched from a few feet away. Their eyes were wide, their mouths slightly open. You could tell they were all thinking the same thing. What could possibly be under there that made the FBI show up like this? The first thing they saw wasn't shocking. It looked like just old dirt and broken wood. But then something shiny appeared. One of the agents carefully brushed it off. It was metal. Not just any metal. It looked like a small box, covered in dust, but still sealed tight. The room was dead silent as the agent lifted it up. That's when it happened. The moment that would stay with the Pawn Stars crew forever. When the agent opened the box, everyone leaned forward. What was inside? A weapon, a document, something dangerous. Nobody knew what to expect, but nobody was ready for what they saw. Inside the box were several small items. Some looked like old coins, but not like anything they had ever seen in the shop. There were also old photos, black and white, some torn, some still clear. One of the pictures showed a man in a suit shaking hands with someone who looked a lot like a famous historical figure. It was hard to believe, but it was right there. But the thing that made them freeze, the thing that truly shocked them, was the final item in the box. A small notebook, leather-bound and very worn. When the agent opened it, he started flipping through pages slowly. The writing inside was faded, but readable. The name at the front of the notebook was from a person involved in one of the biggest secret government projects in American history. That's when it hit them. This wasn't just a hidden box. This wasn't just a random junk. This was part of history. Something had been hidden under their feet for years, and they had no idea. The FBI had been looking for it for a long time, and now they had finally found it, right in the middle of the Pawn Stars shop. The crew didn't speak, they didn't move. They were frozen, not just from fear, but from the weight of what they had just witnessed. This was the kind of thing that only happens in movies. But it was happening to them. It was real. And it changed the way they looked at their own store forever. After the box was removed, the agents explained that they had been tracking down this lead for years. An old informant had given them a tip that something was buried in this location. Nobody had believed it at first, but they followed every clue, and it brought them to that exact floor. The Pawn Stars had unknowingly been standing on a piece of history the whole time. When the FBI left, the store felt different. The floor was patched up, but the energy had changed. The crew didn't joke around like they usually did. They sat quietly, still thinking about what they had seen. That single moment, when the box was opened, stayed with them. It reminded them that even in a place full of rare items, there are still things that can shock you, things that carry more meaning than price tags and collector's value. It was a reminder that history hides in strange places. And sometimes the most ordinary floors can cover the most extraordinary secrets. When the FBI team began ripping up the floor, no one knew exactly what to expect. At first it seemed like a strange, even impossible thing. The Pawn Stars crew had worked in that shop for years, and had seen plenty of odd situations, but nothing like this. As the FBI agents moved in, carefully lifting up the old wooden boards, a heavy silence filled the room. It was hard to tell whether it was the weight of the moment or the sheer mystery of it all. But everyone could sense that something big was about to happen. The crew had no idea why they were asked to leave the area, but the looks on the agents' faces made it clear that they weren't there for a simple reason. What made this situation even stranger was that the FBI wasn't just there to search for something obvious. No one thought there could be anything important under the floorboards. After all, it was just the floor of a pawn shop. Nothing out of the ordinary. But the FBI had a specific tip. They weren't there on a random whim. The agents were carefully searching for something hidden, something old and valuable, something that might hold a secret of enormous importance. But what could possibly be hidden underneath a floor that had probably been there for decades? As the agents began to peel back the layers of the floor, it was clear that this wasn't just an ordinary renovation job. They weren't just fixing or cleaning up the shop. They were looking for something. The crew stood off to the side, watching closely. No one was sure what the agents were hoping to find, but the tension was building. It felt like something out of a crime drama, not an everyday day at the pawn shop. The idea that something hidden was buried under their feet seemed almost impossible. It made everyone wonder, how could they have missed it all these years? When the first section of the floor was finally lifted, it wasn't what anyone expected. It wasn't just dirt or old trash. Underneath was something that looked like it had been there for a long time. There was a small sealed metal box, covered in dust and grime. It wasn't huge, but it was heavy, and it caught the agents' attention immediately. The crew watched in stunned silence, their eyes locked on the box. What was it? Why was it hidden under the floor? Why hadn't anyone ever noticed it before? These were the questions racing through their minds. Could this be the thing the FBI had been looking for? The agents slowly and carefully lifted the box from the ground. It looked ancient. The rust on it suggested it had been there for years, maybe even decades. Everyone could feel the anticipation building. This was no longer just about the floor being ripped up. This was about finding something that might hold the key to an unknown mystery. There was a clear sense that whatever was inside that box could change everything. It was the moment that everyone in the room had been waiting for, even if they hadn't realized it. The box was opened slowly, as if the agents wanted to take their time with it. The Pawn Stars crew stood there, unable to look away. No one dared to speak. The mystery of what was inside the box was so powerful that it almost seemed like time itself had slowed down. The agents carefully inspected the contents. At first, they seemed like ordinary objects, old coins, some faded documents, and a few pieces of jewelry. But as they dug deeper into the box, it became clear that this wasn't just a collection of random items. There was something more here, something that didn't belong in a pawn shop. And the more the agents uncovered, the more it seemed like this box had been hidden for a reason. The crew couldn't help but ask themselves, why was this stuff hidden under their floor? What did it mean? What was the connection between these items and the larger mystery that was unfolding right before their eyes? It wasn't just the coins or the documents that caught their eye, it was the history behind them. Some of the items seemed to be from a time long before the pawn shop had ever opened. One of the documents was signed by someone who was involved in a famous event in history, and the coins looked like they came from a secret government operation. This was not a collection of random junk that had been misplaced. This was something much bigger. What followed was even more shocking. As the agents carefully examined the notebook that had been buried in the box, it became clear that this was not just some old forgotten artifact. The notebook contained records, notes, and even maps. The writing inside was faded, but it was legible enough to make out important details. It was tied to one of the most mysterious and secretive operations in American history. And the name attached to it was a person no one in the Pawn Stars crew had ever expected to be linked to the shop. This wasn't just an old piece of paper, it was a key to a puzzle that had remained hidden for years. And it was sitting under their shop all along. The crew stood frozen, their minds racing with questions. How had no one noticed this before? How could they have missed something this important? The FBI's presence now made sense, but it raised even more questions. Why had this secret been hidden so carefully? And what did it mean for the Pawn Stars? They had always been a place where people brought in their old treasures, but this was different. This was a treasure with a history, a connection to something larger. And the more the crew thought about it, the more they realized how close they had come to something much bigger than they had ever imagined. As the FBI agents wrapped up their search and left the shop, the Pawn Stars crew was left in stunned silence. The atmosphere in the shop had completely changed. No one was talking. No one was joking around. Everyone was thinking about what had just happened, and about the incredible discovery they had witnessed. It was the kind of thing that made them realize that no matter how much experience they had, there would always be secrets waiting to be uncovered. Even in a place like their shop, where they had seen so many rare and valuable items, something as big as this could still be hidden in plain sight. The whole experience was a reminder of how easy it is to overlook something important. It also showed them that history is never truly gone. Sometimes it's buried just beneath the surface, waiting to be found by those who are willing to dig deep enough. The Pawn Stars had always been a place where valuable things came in and out, but now they had learned that even the most ordinary-looking places can hide the most extraordinary secrets. The Pawn Stars crew had always thought they knew their shop like the back of their hands. They spent countless hours working there, buying and selling items, chatting with customers, and making deals. The shop had been open for many years, and over time it had become almost like a second home to them. But when the FBI arrived and started tearing up the old floor, everything they thought they knew about their space began to change. The floor, which seemed like a simple part of the shop, had suddenly become the center of a mystery they never expected. It was just an old floor, something no one had ever thought twice about. Who would have guessed that something hidden under it could change everything? The floor had been there for as long as the shop had been in business. It had seen decades of traffic, from visitors and customers to staff members working in the back. It was just a regular floor. Nothing special. Or so they thought. When the FBI agents showed up with their tools and began pulling up the boards, it felt like the entire history of the shop was being torn apart. The crew watched as the agents removed the old, worn-out floorboards, revealing what lay beneath. At first it looked like nothing out of the ordinary. Just dust, dirt, and old wood that had probably been there for years. But that was only the surface, and as the agents dug deeper, they realized something was hidden far beneath. The Pawn Stars crew stood back, nervous and unsure of what was happening. They had seen plenty of oddities in their shop over the years, but this felt different. This was more than just a random item or a piece of junk someone wanted to sell. It felt like they were about to uncover something important, something that had been hidden away for a reason. It was almost as if the floor had been guarding a secret for all these years, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The question on everyone's mind was the same. What could be hidden beneath this simple, ordinary floor that would require the FBI to get involved? As the agents continued to lift the floorboards, the crew couldn't help but wonder if they had missed something all this time. How many times had they walked over that floor without ever thinking that there might be something buried underneath? It was just a floor after all. Nothing special about it. But now, as the boards were pulled up and the dust settled, it was clear that this was no ordinary floor. It was the kind of floor that could hide secrets, things that no one could have imagined. The moment the first section of the floor was fully removed, the agents saw something that immediately caught their attention. It wasn't just old dirt and wood. It was a metal box, small and rusted, but clearly something important. It had been hidden there for years, possibly even decades, and it was now in the hands of the FBI. The Pawn Stars crew, who had never expected to find anything under the floor, stood frozen in shock. What was in the box? Why had it been hidden there? What kind of secret could be tied to a simple pawn shop in Las Vegas? The agents carefully pulled the box out from under the floor and held it up for everyone to see. The Pawn Stars crew could hardly believe what they were witnessing. It was a moment that felt like it belonged in a movie, not something that would happen in their own shop. The box, which seemed so ordinary at first glance, suddenly felt like the key to something much larger. The crew was caught up in the mystery, each person wondering what was inside the box and what it would mean for them. They had no idea that this discovery would change the way they viewed their shop forever. The agents slowly opened the box, their hands steady as they revealed what was inside. The Pawn Stars crew watched closely, eager to see what had been hidden for so long. At first, the contents didn't seem to be anything out of the ordinary. There were some old coins, some torn pieces of paper, and a few random items that seemed like they might belong to someone's personal collection. But as the agents dug deeper into the box, the pieces began to fall into place. The items weren't random at all. They were connected to a larger mystery, one that was much bigger than anything the crew had ever dealt with before. One of the items in the box caught everyone's attention, a small notebook. It was old and worn, the pages yellowed with age. The Pawn Stars crew had no idea what it was, but the look on the agents' faces made it clear that this was no ordinary notebook. The agents slowly opened the pages, revealing handwritten notes and diagrams that seemed to tell a story. The writing was faded, but it was still legible. And what the agents read made their eyes widen with shock. The notebook wasn't just a random collection of thoughts or notes, it was a record of something far more significant. As the agents continued to go through the box, the Pawn Stars crew began to realize that this wasn't just some old forgotten object. It was tied to a piece of history, something that had been hidden for a long time. The notebook contained information about a government project that was shrouded in secrecy. The coins, too, weren't just old currency. They were connected to a secret operation that had taken place many years ago. The Pawn Stars crew was stunned. They had no idea that something so important could be hidden under their floor. It was as if the shop had been sitting on top of a piece of history, one that no one had ever thought to uncover. What made the whole situation even more surreal was the fact that this secret had been buried right under their feet all along. For years they had been working in the shop, buying and selling items, never realizing that something so significant was hiding beneath them. It was a reminder that sometimes the most ordinary places can hold the most extraordinary secrets. The Pawn Stars had always thought they knew their shop better than anyone, but now they realized that there were things they couldn't have even imagined. As the FBI carefully packed up the contents of the box, the crew stood in stunned silence. The atmosphere in the shop had completely changed. What had once been a place of business where deals were made and items came and went was now a place of mystery and history. The Pawn Stars would never look at their shop the same way again. They had just uncovered a secret that had been hidden for years, and they knew that this discovery would stay with them forever. The old floor, which had seemed so ordinary and unimportant, had turned out to be the key to something much bigger than they could have ever imagined. When the FBI walked into the Pawn Stars shop, it was clear from the moment they entered that this wasn't a typical day. For a crew that had spent so much time handling strange and rare items, this was something beyond the usual deals and bartering they were used to. The Pawn Stars crew had always been accustomed to handling items of value, but this felt different. The arrival of the FBI wasn't something that happened every day. In fact, it was something no one had ever expected to happen in their shop. The curiosity started to build, and the tension in the air was almost palpable. Why were federal agents involved? What did they want with the Pawn Stars? The fact that the FBI was there wasn't just unusual. It was shocking. It immediately raised questions. What kind of operation was happening here? Were they looking for something specific? Had the Pawn Stars unknowingly been involved in something illegal or dangerous? No one knew, but it was clear that this was no random visit. The crew watched the agents closely, trying to read their expressions and figure out what was going on. There was no explanation at first. The agents didn't offer any hints or clues. They didn't explain why they were there. Instead, they acted with the kind of calm professionalism that made the crew even more nervous. The FBI agents didn't waste any time. They had a clear purpose, and they were determined to get to the bottom of whatever mystery had led them to this specific place. As they moved through the shop, their presence created an eerie atmosphere. The Pawn Stars crew, used to dealing with eccentric customers and rare treasures, suddenly felt out of their element. This wasn't about negotiating prices or figuring out the authenticity of an item. This was something much bigger. The agents were methodical in their actions, and their movements made it clear that they weren't there for just a casual look around. The crew's curiosity grew as they watched the agents carefully inspect the shop. They seemed to be looking for something, but no one knew what. It was almost as if they were searching for a hidden treasure, something buried under the floorboards of the pawn shop, a place where no one would ever think to look. The crew couldn't help but wonder what the agents had discovered or what had led them to this point. They had been in the shop for years, and nothing like this had ever happened before. The idea that something of importance could be hidden right under their feet was almost too unbelievable to grasp. But the fact that the FBI was involved meant that this was serious. As the agents went about their search, the crew's minds raced. What could they be looking for? Why was the FBI involved? And how had they found out about the hidden treasure beneath the floor? It was clear that the agents weren't just there by chance. They had a specific reason for being there, and they were not going to leave without finding whatever it was they were looking for. It made the whole situation feel even more mysterious, like a puzzle that was slowly being pieced together. Each new development only added to the growing sense of tension and intrigue. The FBI's involvement also made it clear that this wasn't just a normal pawn shop visit. This wasn't about a person trying to sell something rare or valuable. It was about something much more important, something with serious consequences. The crew knew that the items hidden under the floor were not just old trinkets or forgotten valuables. They were part of a larger story, one that stretched far beyond the Pawn Stars shop. This wasn't just about making a deal, it was about uncovering a piece of history, and perhaps a secret that had been kept for years. As the agents continued their search, the crew found themselves in a state of disbelief. They had never expected something like this to happen in their shop. They had seen countless rare and valuable items come and go, but this was different. The FBI wasn't there for a simple transaction. They were there to investigate something far more serious. It wasn't just about the items in the shop, it was about what had been hidden beneath the floorboards, waiting to be uncovered. The FBI's involvement also raised even more questions. Who had hidden these items, and why? What was their connection to the Pawn Stars shop? And what would happen once the agents discovered the full extent of what had been buried there for so many years? It was clear that this discovery wasn't just a random find, it was a clue to something much bigger, something that had been kept secret for far too long. The crew could only imagine the kind of history tied to these objects. Was it linked to a famous event? A government operation? A conspiracy that had been buried in the past? The more the crew thought about it, the more they realized how little they knew about what was really going on in their own shop. They had spent years building their business and developing a reputation for finding rare and valuable items, but they had never imagined they were standing on top of something this significant. The involvement of the FBI made everything seem so much more serious. It was no longer just about a few old coins or pieces of jewelry. It was about uncovering a mystery, one that had been hidden for years. And the Pawn Stars crew had unknowingly been a part of it the whole time. As the search continued, the agents became more focused. They were no longer just casually looking around, they were determined to find something. The crew could see that the agents were onto something big, but they still didn't know what. It was the kind of situation where everything felt uncertain. The agents weren't explaining much, and the crew had no way of knowing how deep this mystery went. But the fact that the FBI was involved was enough to make it clear that whatever they were searching for had to be important. It wasn't just a simple find, it was a discovery that could change everything. As the day went on, the mystery only deepened. The FBI's presence in the Pawn Stars shop made it clear that the stakes were high. No one knew exactly what was hidden beneath the floor, but the more the agents uncovered, the more it seemed like the mystery was only beginning to unfold. The crew watched closely, their curiosity growing by the minute. It was like being caught in the middle of a real-life investigation, and no one knew what the next twist would bring. The moment the box was finally opened, everything changed. It felt as if time had stopped for a brief second. No one had expected what was inside. The Pawn Stars crew stood there in absolute silence, their eyes locked on the contents of the box. The metal container, which had seemed like an ordinary forgotten item hidden under the floor, now held the key to a much bigger mystery. The shock of what they saw left everyone in the room stunned. They couldn't take their eyes off the items inside, unsure of how to react to what they had just uncovered. How could something like this have been hidden beneath their feet all these years? What was the meaning of this discovery? And most importantly, what did it all mean for the Pawn Stars crew? Inside the box were several objects, all seemingly unrelated, yet they gave off a strange, undeniable connection. At first glance, they appeared to be nothing more than old relics, dusty coins, faded papers, and a few small, worn items that looked like they had come from a different time. But as the crew and FBI agents carefully examined the objects, it became clear that these items were part of a much larger story. This wasn't just a collection of random old things. Each object seemed to hold a specific purpose, each piece of the puzzle carefully placed together over time. One of the first things that caught the eye of the FBI agents was the notebook. It was old, its pages yellowed with age, but the writing inside was still legible. The Pawn Stars crew had no idea what the notebook was, but the agents handled it with extreme care, as if they had just uncovered something of incredible importance. The notebook wasn't just a collection of random notes. It contained detailed information about events and people that no one in the shop had ever heard of. The notes referred to a series of events that had happened long ago, events that seemed to have been carefully erased from history. Why would someone hide these notes under the floor of a pawn shop? And what connection did these events have to the present day? As the agents continued to read the notebook, the crew couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. There was something about this discovery that felt wrong. The more they learned, the more they realized how little they knew about the history of the items that had been brought into the shop over the years. The more they looked into the notebook, the more it became clear that these items were linked to something far more sinister than anyone had expected. This wasn't just a collection of forgotten treasures. It was a record of secrets, secrets that had been hidden for decades, perhaps even longer. The next item to catch their attention was a series of old, tarnished coins. They were nothing like the typical coins the Pawn Stars crew dealt with. These coins were rare, extremely rare. In fact, they were so rare that the crew immediately realized they had never seen anything like them before. The coins looked ancient and their markings were unusual. It was as if they had been created for a specific purpose, with symbols and designs that made no sense. The more the agents studied the coins, the more they realized how significant they were. These coins were connected to something far bigger than they had imagined. They weren't just valuable for their rarity, they were tied to a specific event in history, an event that had been shrouded in mystery. As the investigation continued, it became clear that these coins were linked to a historical event that no one had ever heard of before. The agents uncovered a story that had been buried in the past, a story that involved powerful people, secret organizations, and a conspiracy that had been kept hidden from the public for years. This was no longer just about old coins or forgotten documents. This was about a history that had been deliberately erased, a history that had been kept secret for a reason. And the Pawn Stars crew, who thought they were just running a pawn shop, had somehow found themselves caught in the middle of it all. With each new discovery, the shock continued to grow. The more the crew learned, the more they realized that they had stumbled upon something far bigger than they could have ever imagined. The box was not just a collection of forgotten items, it was a map of secrets, a record of history that had been kept hidden from the world. The question on everyone's mind was the same. Why had this history been hidden? Who had buried it under the floorboards of a pawn shop, and what was their connection to the present day? As the FBI agents carefully examined each item, they began to piece together the story. They uncovered information that led them to a hidden network of people who had been involved in some of the most significant events in history. This network had operated in the shadows, pulling the strings behind the scenes and leaving a trail of secrets in its wake. The more the agents uncovered, the clearer it became that the Pawn Stars crew had stumbled upon a treasure trove of hidden history. These objects were not just relics of the past, they were keys to understanding a larger, far-reaching conspiracy that had remained hidden for decades. The crew, who had spent so much time surrounded by rare and valuable items, could hardly believe what they were hearing. They had always considered themselves experts in identifying valuable items, but this was something else entirely. They were not just dealing with objects of value, they were dealing with pieces of history, items that had been hidden for a reason. And as the story of these hidden objects unfolded, the crew began to realize that they had become a part of something much bigger than themselves. As the FBI agents continued their investigation, the Pawn Stars crew was left with a sense of awe and disbelief. The shock of discovery was overwhelming. They had started the day like any other, with customers coming and going, but now they found themselves in the middle of a mystery that had been buried for years. They had uncovered secrets that had been hidden beneath their feet, secrets that were tied to some of the most significant events in history. The more they learned, the more they realized how little they knew about the world they lived in. This discovery had opened their eyes to a hidden world, one filled with secrets, conspiracies, and mysteries that no one had ever imagined. The crew could only imagine what would come next. They had uncovered a small piece of a much larger puzzle, and the questions were only beginning to pile up. What other secrets lay hidden beneath the surface? What did the FBI know that they didn't? And most importantly, how would this discovery change their lives forever? The shock of what they had just uncovered was only the beginning of a much larger journey, one that would take them deeper into a world of mystery, secrets, and danger than they had ever thought possible. After the FBI finished their investigation in the Pawn Stars shop, it became clear that what had started as a typical day of buying and selling had transformed into something much larger, something that none of them could have predicted. The crew had always prided themselves on knowing the history of every item that passed through their hands, but this discovery had shaken that confidence. The objects they had uncovered were more than just old antiques or rare artifacts. They were part of a much bigger story, one that stretched far beyond the Pawn Stars shop, into a web of secrets that no one could have ever imagined. The more they learned, the more they realized that what they had found was just a small piece of a much larger puzzle. As the agents continued to investigate the items they had uncovered, they began to put together the fragments of a story that had been hidden for decades. The notebook, the coins, and other mysterious objects were all part of a history that had been deliberately erased from the public eye. The crew had always thought they were simply dealing with treasures that people wanted to sell or trade, but now they found themselves in the middle of a conspiracy that spanned across decades, involving powerful people and secret organizations. The FBI was deep into their investigation, but the Pawn Stars crew had no idea how far-reaching this mystery really was. Every new piece of information they uncovered only made them ask more questions. It wasn't just about the objects they had found, it was about the people who had hidden them. The more they learned, the more it became clear that these items weren't just accidentally hidden away. They had been deliberately placed in the Pawn Stars shop's floorboards, as if someone wanted to make sure they stayed hidden until the right moment. But why? Who had gone to such great lengths to make sure these secrets were kept out of the public eye? What was the reason behind this elaborate hiding? These questions filled the crew's minds as they stood in the shop, watching as the agents worked to uncover the truth. The crew had always thought of their shop as a place where people could come to find something special, whether it was a piece of history, a rare collectible, or just something that sparked their interest. But now, as they looked at the items that had been uncovered, they realized that their shop was much more than that. It wasn't just a place to make deals, it was a key part of a much larger story, one that had been kept hidden for years. The more they learned about the history of the objects they had uncovered, the more they realized that they were caught up in something far bigger than they could have ever imagined. One of the most surprising aspects of the discovery was the connection between these items and some of the most significant events in history. The items weren't just random objects that someone had hidden away. They were pieces of a story, one that involved powerful people, secret organizations, and events that had been erased from public memory. The notebook was filled with information about a hidden network of people who had been involved in shaping history behind the scenes. These people had played key roles in major events, manipulating outcomes, and controlling the flow of information. They had been working in the shadows, pulling the strings and making sure that the truth stayed buried. The coins, too, were tied to a hidden history. They weren't just valuable because of their rarity. They were connected to a secret operation, one that had been kept from the public for years. The more the agents investigated the coins, the more they uncovered about this secret operation. It seemed as though these coins had been created as part of a larger scheme, one that involved powerful organizations and people who were trying to change the course of history. The more the agents dug, the more it became clear that these items were part of something much bigger than they could have ever imagined. The bigger picture was beginning to emerge, but it was still shrouded in mystery. The Pawn Stars crew, who had spent years in the business of buying and selling rare items, suddenly found themselves at the center of a story that was far beyond anything they had ever dealt with before. The crew had always thought they were simply helping people sell their possessions. But now they realized that they had been unwittingly involved in a conspiracy that had been hidden for decades. They were no longer just pawnbrokers. They were part of a much larger story, one that involved powerful forces working behind the scenes to manipulate history. As the FBI continued their investigation, the crew couldn't help but wonder how deep this mystery really went. They had uncovered a small piece of a much larger puzzle, but how much more was out there? What other secrets were hidden in plain sight, waiting to be discovered? And who else was involved in this hidden network of people working in the shadows? The more the crew learned, the more they realized that they were only scratching the surface. There was so much more to this story than they could have ever imagined, and they were now a part of it. The crew began to realize that this discovery wasn't just about uncovering hidden objects. It was about uncovering the truth. The truth about a secret history, about powerful people who had worked behind the scenes to shape events and keep the public in the dark. The crew had always prided themselves on being experts in rare and valuable items, but this was different. This wasn't just about the value of an object. It was about understanding the hidden history behind the items, about unraveling a story that had been buried for years. As the investigation continued, the Pawn Stars crew began to see their shop in a completely new light. They had always thought of their shop as just a business, a place where people came to buy and sell. But now they realized that their shop had been a part of something much bigger. They had unknowingly become involved in a conspiracy that had been kept hidden for decades. The items they had found were just the beginning. There was a whole world of secrets, conspiracies, and hidden histories waiting to be uncovered, and the crew was now at the center of it all. The FBI agents were working tirelessly to uncover the full story behind the items that had been hidden beneath the floorboards. But the Pawn Stars crew knew that they were just beginning to understand the true scope of what was happening. They had been caught up in a much larger web of secrets, and as the investigation unfolded, they knew that their lives would never be the same again. They had stumbled upon a story that was far bigger than anything they had ever expected, and now they were a part of it.